The glass tower loomed against the dusky skyline, a fortress of power and isolation. Inside, the man once crowned king of industry sat handcuffed, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the cold metal binding his wrists. His eyes were locked on a small child, standing quietly in the marble lobby, innocence and bewilderment mirrored in their gaze. A tear traced down his cheek as the weight of everything he built crumbled silently. On a massive screen behind him, his face dominated the cover of Time magazine, emblazoned with a headline that screamed ruin. A deep, resonant voice broke the silence. He built an empire, but he couldn't save her. No names, no backstory, only the raw, shattering paradox of a titan fallen, and a fragile hope standing before him. No names were spoken, no explanations given, but the silence screamed louder than any words. The child's small voice trembled as they stepped forward. "Why can't you save her?" The man's shoulders sagged beneath the invisible weight of regret, and for the first time, vulnerability cracked the armor of a man who always thought himself untouchable. Outside, the city buzzed unaware, its lights casting long shadows over a story of shattered pride and fragile hope. The stage was set, not for victory, but for reckoning. A silent promise hung between them. Something broken might yet be mended. The man looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I could control everything, but I couldn't control this." His eyes reflected a haunted past, a fortress of power that had crumbled from within. The child, undeterred, replied quietly, "Maybe it's time to believe again." The words lingered like a fragile hope, a seed planted in the barren soil of loss. Somewhere beyond the glass, the city's heartbeat pulsed, indifferent yet alive. This was no longer just a fall from grace, it was the beginning of something far greater. The glass tower, once a symbol of invincibility, now felt like a cage. The man rose slowly, each movement heavy with the gravity of his downfall. He stepped toward the window, gazing out at the sprawling city below, a kingdom he had built and nearly lost. The child stood silently behind him, a quiet witness to the collapse and the fragile stirrings of hope. Outside, night deepened, and somewhere life went on. Unaware that inside these walls, a man who thought he was above love was about to confront what had been running from all along. A voice echoed softly in the vast emptiness. He built walls around his heart, convinced that power was protection. The man turned slowly, the first hint of vulnerability in his stance. "But love," the voice continued, "is the one thing no empire can conquer." The child's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. The man inhaled deeply, a long road of redemption ahead, but for the first time, hope glimmered in the darkness. The stage was set for a story not of downfall, but of belief reborn. Long before the empire rose, there was a child watching from a cracked kitchen window, eyes wide with both fear and fierce resolve. The father's silhouette was blurred, a man defeated by mistakes, drowning in debt and despair. "I'll never be like him," the child whispered to the cold night air, promising to build something different, something unbreakable. But in that promise lived both the fire to rise and the shadow of shame. That boy's heart carried a weight unseen, the burden of legacy and the fear of repeating the same failures. The seeds of ambition had been sown in sorrow and tempered by love lost. Years later, that child became a young woman, her reflection fractured by the cold glass of a boardroom window. She turned away, shoulders tense, the weight of expectations pressing down. The room buzzed with voices she barely heard, decisions made without her, doors closing before she could step through. Her eyes held a storm, anger, disappointment, and a fire that refused to die. "This isn't the end," she told herself, but the sting of exclusion cut deep. The scars of childhood whispered that power was both a prize and a prison. In a small cluttered store, a boy no older than 10 sat alone, clutching a worn teddy bear. His mother stood nearby, pleading with the store manager for a job, her eyes tired but fierce. The boy's gaze never left the cracked linoleum floor. Here, survival wasn't about grand dreams but simple hope. A warm meal, a roof, a future. The boy's silence spoke volumes of the sacrifices made by those who came before, shaping a story of love tangled with hardship. He would carry these moments like armor, ready to fight for a life better than theirs. These wounds, the quiet pain of watching loved ones struggle, were the invisible chains that bound the story's true hero. Not the CEO in his glass tower, but the fragments of family and childhood that built him. Each loss, each whispered promise, each shadow of fear planted a seed of relentless drive. The child who vowed never to be weak, the woman who refused to be silenced, the boy who clung to hope in the dark. All these lives converged into one unstoppable force. The wounds carried were no weakness. They were the roots of an empire yet to rise. From these early scars came a promise that power would never be just about control or wealth. It would be about breaking cycles, of failure, of fear, of isolation. The true story behind the man in handcuffs was one of inherited pain, transformed by fierce love and unyielding will. The child's vow echoed in the silent corners of boardrooms and empty stores alike. The question was no longer if he could save her, but if he could save himself, and the pieces of a family fractured by time and ambition. The journey toward belief had only just begun. The journey had begun, long nights stacked like bricks, sleepless and relentless. The man poured himself into building anew, pitching ideas with a fierce determination fueled by every loss. Friends faded into distant memories, as meetings swallowed his days. Birthdays passed unnoticed, replaced by the sterile glow of computer screens and the cold hum of fluorescent lights. His victories felt hollow, trophies carved from exhaustion and sacrifice. "I'm building something real," he told himself, but inside doubt whispered, what was the price of this ascent? The relentless climb to power was no longer a choice. It was a cost that grew heavier with each step. Amid the whirlwind of deals and strategies, personal moments slipped through his fingers like sand. Invitations from friends went unanswered, lovers grew distant, and the phone calls became less frequent. "I can't do this alone," a quiet voice said once, but it was swallowed by the roar of ambition. Success tasted bitter when savored in solitude. The man stood at a crossroads, caught between the hunger for legacy and the aching void left by sacrifices unseen. Each win was a reminder that power demanded payment, and sometimes the cost was too high to bear. Despite the sacrifices, progress came in fits and starts. The business grew, pitches won applause, and the boardroom began to acknowledge his presence. But the victories felt brittle, like glass underfoot. Each success was shadowed by what had been left behind, missed milestones with family, friendships fractured by absence, and a loneliness that no deal could fill. The man realized that climbing higher didn't erase the cracks, it only made the fall more devastating. Yet he pressed on, driven by a promise made long ago, even if the cost threatened to consume him. The man's empire expanded, but the price became clearer with every late night and empty chair. His health faltered, friendships thinned, and the warmth of home felt like a distant memory. Sleepless nights bled into restless days, the weight of responsibility crushing more than just his spirit. Every missed call and forgotten promise added to the toll. He asked himself, "Is this what power costs?" Yet the answer was drowned out by the relentless drive to succeed, to prove that he was more than the failures of the past. But ambition, as intoxicating as it was never without consequence. The climb demanded sacrifices, and with each step, the man's world grew narrower. Friends and lovers became echoes, celebrations passed in silence, and joy was traded for duty. The cost was no longer just personal, it was the erosion of everything once held dear. Yet beneath the weight of solitude a spark remained, a flicker of hope that what was built could also heal. The man clenched his fists, eyes burning with the fierce determination to carry on. This was more than a business, it was a chance to rewrite the story, even if the price was his own undoing. The ground shifted beneath him in the silence of a late-night board meeting. Hello. The man's world unraveled as whispered truths surfaced, secrets buried deep and long denied. The empire he fought to build was never truly his. His co-founder, the trusted partner, was also his sibling, the blood tie both bond and betrayal. Deals made in shadows, ambitions intertwined with family fractures. His breath caught, the weight of betrayal heavier than any failure. The fortress of power he built now felt like a prison of lies, shaking everything he thought he knew about loyalty and legacy. The revelation was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, another betrayal emerged. His mentor, once a guiding light, had been siphoning funds and trust alike. The man's heart sank deeper as the truth cut through the veneer of success. This wasn't just business, it was a personal fracture, a theft of faith and years of hard work. The team he relied on was crumbling, and with it, the future he dreamed of. Every whispered confession felt like a fresh wound, bleeding away the foundation of what he had believed to be unshakable. Amid the chaos, the man faced a cruel truth: he was dying. A diagnosis kept hidden from the board, a secret that gnawed at his resolve. The ticking clock was relentless, yet he bore the burden alone, refusing to show weakness. His steps faltered beneath the weight of mortality, and the empire's foundations trembled not just from external threats, but from the fragility of its leader. In the darkest moments, he questioned whether he had the strength to fight for a legacy that might outlive him, but could crumble without him. The empire teetered on the edge of collapse as internal cracks deepened. Board members whispered of takeovers and betrayals. The man's health faded, but so did his control. Meetings that once hummed with confidence now echoed with doubt. A final showdown loomed, a vote that would either save or destroy everything. The man's heart pounded with urgency, knowing this moment would define not just the future of the company, but the meaning of his sacrifice. The floor beneath him seemed to crumble, and all he could do was hold on tight. In the final breathless moments before the vote, the man sought solace in a quiet corner of the tower. A daughter's face appeared in memory, a silent hug, a fragile connection amid chaos. This was the personal cost beneath the headlines. A legacy not just of power, but of love and loss intertwined. Whatever happened next, the moment had changed everything. The empire was no longer just about business. It was about redemption, forgiveness, and the fragile hope that even broken things could heal. The boardroom was a crucible of tension, every breath thick with anticipation. The man stood at the head of the polished table, a figure both commanding and fragile. His voice broke the heavy silence with quiet authority. This company is more than a ledger of profits or the sum of its assets. It's a legacy, a testament to the sacrifices made, the dreams forged in fire, and the love that binds us beyond all else. His gaze swept across the room, locking onto every conflicted face. Some eyes searched for hope, others for reasons to surrender. The weight of decades pressed down on him as the room held its breath, knowing this moment was more than a business decision, it was a reckoning. The empire's fate, his family's future, and his own redemption balanced on the edge of the next few words. His words echoed long after they left his lips, stirring echoes in the cold room. One board member whispered under her breath, "We must ask ourselves, does this legacy deserve to survive?" Another voice followed, firm but weary, "Or have we held on too long? Is it time to let go?" The room became a battleground of wills and hearts, a silent war between the weight of history and the lure of fresh beginnings. Each executive wrestled with the ghosts of past failures and the fear of what might come. The man's gaze flickered over each face, desperate to find the allies who would stand with him. The final vote was no mere formality. It was a crossroads that would irrevocably shape the fate of an empire, and the lives intertwined with it. In the brief stillness before the verdict, the man's mind drifted beyond the boardroom, to a memory frozen in time. He saw a fragile embrace with a daughter, their silent hug more powerful than any speech. It was a moment that spoke of love amid chaos, forgiveness amid regret. His voice softened, almost breaking. "Whatever the outcome, this isn't just about a company. It's about us, our story, our sacrifices, our hope." The room seemed to lean into his words, the Titan's armor slipping to reveal a man raw and real. As hands began to raise in the vote, each gesture felt like a heartbeat, determining not just business fate, but the fragile bonds of family and trust. The final tally arrived like a distant thunderclap, its impact shaking the room and the man's core. The vote was split but leaned in favor of preservation, a razor-thin victory forged through pain and persistence. A silent nod passed between him and a steadfast ally, an unspoken promise to rebuild from the ashes. Relief surged beneath exhaustion as tears fought for release behind his guarded gaze. The empire, battered and bruised, still stood, but the scars were unmistakable. This moment was not a triumphant conclusion, but the fragile birth of healing and hope, carved from sacrifice and the hard truth that survival demanded constant sacrifice. As the room emptied and the weight of the vote settled, the man lingered by the massive glass window, gazing out at the city's shimmering lights. The empire was intact, yet the true victory lay beyond balance sheets and headlines. It was the chance to rebuild himself, to mend the broken pieces beneath the public triumph. The silence around him was profound, filled with unspoken promises and the quiet stirrings of renewal. He whispered to the night, "This is only the beginning." Behind the glass, the city pulsed with life, an empire fragile yet fiercely alive, and a man finally ready to believe in something greater than power, redemption, and love. The empire still stood, but the man who had forged it was transformed. The ruthless titan had softened into a figure shaped by the weight of lost time and missed moments. Birthdays he never attended, voices he never answered, laughter he never heard, all carved into his heart like scars that refused to fade. Yet, in this quiet reckoning, a fragile grace emerged. The boardroom battles and cold negotiations felt distant, replaced by tender mornings spent relearning what power truly meant. It was no longer about control or dominance. It was about connection, vulnerability, and the courage to forgive. The walls around his heart, once unyielding and thick, now bore cracks through which soft light poured, illuminating a path toward redemption and peace. In the end, his legacy would not be counted in dollars or deals, but in the love he finally allowed himself to receive. His daughter, once a guarded presence in the shadow of a towering empire, had found a new path far from the glare of power. Boardroom battles gave way to the quiet rhythm of creation, her days filled with color and brushstrokes in a sunlit artist's studio. She traded corporate ambition for personal freedom, shedding the heavy expectations tied to her family's legacy. With each canvas, she reclaimed pieces of herself lost to years of silence and struggle. The once rare smile blossomed into a steady glow, her eyes bright with the joy of choosing her own story. Power, she realized, didn't have to roar. It could be gentle, quiet, and deeply personal. In this freedom she discovered strength, not in wielding authority, but in embracing authenticity. The legacy he left behind was no longer a fortress of cold ambition, but a mosaic of broken and beautiful moments patched together by love and sacrifice. The man often found himself staring at the empire's towering skyline, reflecting on what it meant to build and to lose. The towering walls he had once defended now seemed fragile, the foundation cracked by years of hardship and regret. Yet from the rubble, new growth emerged. Like a resilient tree sprouting from cracked concrete, the empire's future was no longer reliant on one man's strength, but on the shared hope of those who dared to believe again. The true pillars of lasting legacy, he understood at last, were love, sacrifice, forgiveness, and the courage to let go. Time, the great healer, softened the sharp edges of pain and regret. Slowly, the man's health improved, each breath a quiet victory against the shadows of his past. The company, once teetering on the brink, found new leaders who rose with fresh vision, tempered by respect for the sacrifices that came before. Family gatherings, once fractured by silence and distance, began to hold moments of laughter, tears, and reconciliation. The man, who had once defined himself by isolation and control, learned the humility of leaning on others, accepting help, sharing burdens. His final years were not marked by power plays, but by quiet grace. In surrendering control, he found peace. In opening his heart, he found connection. His legacy was no longer a burden but a a torch passed on with love, hope, and the promise that even the most broken things can grow whole again. In the twilight of his journey, the man stood before a mirror, confronting not the CEO, who had once commanded boardrooms, but the man who had fought, stumbled, and ultimately found grace. His reflection was softer now, lines of wisdom and hardship etched deeply into his face. Behind him, through a window, fireworks erupted softly over the city skyline, a celebration not of power, but of survival and renewal. Nearby, a small child's hand reached up tentatively toward an empty boardroom chair, symbolizing the fragile hope handed to the next generation. The story closed, not with an ending, but with the promise of new beginnings, a testament that love, belief, and sacrifice could transcend the tallest towers and darkest nights. He left the company, a voice whispered softly, but never left her. In the quiet solitude of his study, the man stood before a tall, ornate mirror, its surface reflecting a lifetime etched into his weathered features. The battles won and lost, the empires raised and torn down, all mirrored back in eyes softened by time and understanding. Behind him, the faint, distant boom of fireworks rippled through the night air, celebrations not for conquest or victory, but for endurance, for survival, for hope reborn. His gaze lingered, tracing the lines on his face, the scars of regrets carried quietly. With a voice barely above a whisper, heavy with the weight of years, he breathed. He left the company, but never left her. That single phrase carried decades of unspoken truths, a vow suspended in the stillness, an echo of love that transcended power, pride, and loss. The camera shifted gently away, settling on a child's small hand reaching upward, trembling slightly with wonder and determination. The fingertips brushed the polished wood armrest of an empty boardroom chair, the silent symbol of legacy, power, and promise. The chair, bathed in the soft glow of fading sunset, stood pristine yet waiting, a throne for a future yet unwritten. That delicate gesture was a silent vow whispered across generations, a pledge that what was built with sacrifice and love would not end here. In this tender, quiet moment lived the fragile hope of continuity, of renewal, and the boundless possibility that the story would continue, handed down like a torch through time. Outside, the city thrummed with life, a kaleidoscope of movement, light, and sound weaving through its endless streets. Neon signs flickered, headlights streamed like veins of light, and countless lives intersected beneath the sprawling skyline. The man's faint reflection overlapped with this vast urban tapestry, a reminder of how deeply his journey had become entwined with the city itself. His story, marked by ambition, heartbreak, and redemption, had shaped these streets in ways no skyline could capture. But now, standing quietly on the threshold of letting go, he understood that the empire was no longer his to command. It belonged to the many who would carry its spirit forward. His legacy was no longer a towering monument to control, but a living, breathing tale of belief, love, and resilience stretching beyond the horizon. He turned slowly away from the mirror and stepped out into the quiet night. Above, the fireworks continued their silent symphony, bursts of brilliant color painting the dark sky, a final salute to battles fought and lessons learned. Each explosion was a shimmering echo of triumph and loss, hope and sorrow, interwoven like threads in a tapestry. The distant laughter of a child floated on the breeze, carried gently through empty streets, an intangible promise that love and belief endure beyond the fall of empires. With steady steps, the man walked forward, no longer above love or distant from it, but deeply immersed within its fragile embrace. His journey had come full circle, a story of power lost, found, and transcended by the simple, profound truth that the heart never truly breaks alone. As the screen faded into deep blackness, a single line appeared in crisp white text: "He left the company, but never left her." The words hovered softly, glowing like a whispered secret, a promise lingering in the silence. It was a final haunting echo designed to resonate long after the story had ended, an invitation to reflect on the true meaning of legacy. Not the towering empires built or shattered, but the fragile, enduring power of love and belief. The quiet hope that even in the darkest nights, broken hearts can find their way home, and that the stories we carry in our hearts outlast even the grandest titles and fortunes.